Since we're on the subject, I have a question specifically for Shane Gettle, and that was going back to what Representative Grandy read from the Republican Party platform, that one of the agencies to eliminate is the Federal Department of Commerce. Since you were Commerce Commissioner, what is your opinion of that?
Dave, thanks for the question. Actually, when I worked in Washington in between 2001 and 2005, I actually got to serve on a White House commission that was about identifying various programs and recognizing that there was a lot of overlap and trying to find a new home and a new place for them. Some of them were Department of Commerce programs, some of them were USDA programs, some of them were HUD programs. There's a lot of overlap, and so in addition to looking at what we should eliminate, we should also look at what we can consolidate. And we have to take a serious look at these things. I think there's a lot of room to make our federal government more efficient. I like the way our state has approached this in the past too. You make federal agencies present not just a 100% budget, but a budget that is 97% or 95%. You can take your percentage in terms of what you need, and that helps our Congress or our legislators, as the case may be, take a look at the priorities that that agency would identify for cuts, if necessary. We need to be going through that exercise and demand that the President present that kind of budget to Congress and give them some options.
I would like to then ask everybody this question. It was given to me by the audience, and I think it's a very fair question. And I'm going to preface it by saying it's no secret that Congress's approval rating is about 11% right now. Maybe just above the borders. But just below used car salesman. Anyway, first off, A, what do you think of the job Congress is doing? And B, what do you think of John Boehner's leadership as Speaker of the House? And I'll start with Representative Grandy. Aren't you glad I started with you?
Well, no, I just thought you were going in order, so I thought Representative Cobbleman was next. It's okay. As far as the rating in Congress, I think that one of the things that we have to do is clarify really what we mean when we say Congress. Our Republican-run House passed a lot of good legislation, and they had a lot of great ideas that went over to the Senate. The Senate did nothing. They have gone 996 days without passing a budget. In that time frame, we as a North Dakota legislature have gone in twice and passed balanced budgets. We know it can be done, and those types of things need to take place. I think it is more so the administration that should take the brunt of that distrust that is out there. It needs to earn its respect back with good, solid leadership. I'm getting a wave to be done. Do you want me to answer the second part of the question?
Well, we have 1 minute, so that's fine.
Thanks, Dave, for the question. I actually think Congress has pretty well earned their rating for the most part, but I think that it could be greatly improved with some improvements beginning right here, sitting around this table. I think we can do our part. But Betty's exactly right that it's not been the House of Representatives that has been the problem, while they get lumped in with the whole Washington scene. Now, could they do better? I don't think there's any question they could do better. They could drag their feet probably a little harder, say no a little more often. But at the same time, we have to remember that the House is only 1/3 of that particular part of the government. When you take the presidency, the United States Senate, and throw in the House, and then just ignore the courts for a while, you have a limited amount of power. How is that reflected in the performance of Speaker Boehner? I'll tell you, I was not a big fan of Speaker Boehner's until he became the Speaker. I didn't really believe he'd perform as well as he's done. I think he's done a very good job given the very difficult circumstances he has. Not just with the other chamber and the White House, but with a pretty diverse caucus as well. So it's a bit philosophical, but I have great hope as we change both the House, the Senate, and the White House.
Mr. Olson?
I think they've earned their rating. They're effectively doing the same thing as an individual who is running up their credit card too high. They're bringing us to a level that is completely unsustainable. They're not doing their job. In the case of going to war, they've allowed the president to engage in military conflicts without congressional approval, so they're not doing what they're supposed to do there. But instead, they're taking rights away from states and making law that clearly doesn't fall under the federal government. So So no, they're not doing their job effectively. They're not respecting the constitutional rights or states' rights. They're spending us into a hole.
Commissioner Cole?
Thanks, Dave, for the question. What I think is interesting is you talk about 11% approval rating for Congress, but folks back in their own districts think their congressman or woman is doing a good job. And I'll tell you that to me, I said in my opening statements that if we're going to change the way DC operates, we got to quit sending the same kind of people there. I don't think Congress is doing a good job. I don't think the U.S. House is doing nearly the kind of job that they could be doing right now. You know, that's one of the things I think right now is you got too much of the good old boy network out there that folks get elected and they go out there and they become part of the problem. And I'll use the example of the debt ceiling. You know what? The House shouldn't have caved in the debt ceiling vote back in August. We're facing having to raise the debt ceiling again right now. You know what? We raised it back then, Congress did. They put this crazy super committee in, nothing happened, and we're facing about having to raise it again. So I think that the Speaker needs to do a better job. I think Congress needs to do a better job. So I'm not happy right now with what they're doing out in the U.S. House, nor the Senate or the presidency. But the thing is, they've all got to do a better job because this country is faced with a huge debt and deficit.
Representative Conklin?
Well, my experience in the legislature gives me a great deal of understanding of the legislative process. And the legislative branch of government, whether it be in the state legislature or on the federal level, the United States Congress, is the policy-making branch of government. I think Congress has earned its low ratings. When I chaired the National Conference of State Legislators, and that's made up of all 3 branches of government in all 50 states, I saw firsthand how most states do a better job and how much better job North Dakota does even than other states, and certainly much better than Congress. The problem with Congress is that they're obstructionist, they play games, a lot of the decisions are made in smoke-filled rooms. They have a reputation and a habit for inaction. We hear about all the bills that the House has passed and sent to the Senate and Harry Reid won't bring up for a vote. And it's a huge problem. In North Dakota, every bill that's introduced must come to a vote on the House or Senate floor. Every bill that's been passed must go on to the governor. We have a very open system of government. Bills have to have amendments that are germane. The conference committees must restrict their discussion to the issues at hand that relate to that bill. I guess my time is up. I need to stop. But I've got a lot more to share about how we can improve Congress.
Commissioner Gill?
Well, the only report card that matters is what the American public thinks, and they don't think too highly of Congress when it acts collectively. Individually, they do seem to like their congressperson, or they wouldn't send them back. So what do we do? How do we get this team to work together more effectively? I think it begins with sending someone to Washington who knows how to build relationships instead of throwing bombs. Because you have to be able to build coalitions if you're North Dakota's sole congressman or congresswoman. You have to be able to build coalitions and reach across not only your own side of the aisle, but across the table sometimes to get things done. That means you have to preserve the relationships and not just throw bombs and get personal about the politics. I have that ability, and that's why I'm submitting myself to the people of North Dakota. I hope to be able to carry that sort of attitude into the hallways of Congress.
Here's another question from the audience. It's an interesting question, and there was an amendment that was attempted to be put on the North Dakota ballot called the Read the Bill Amendment. And that was the one where they said you had to read a bill and you had to have so many hours before you could vote on a bill. And it forced you to find out exactly what the words are in the bill. So if elected, are you willing to pledge right here and now or at the convention that you will read every page, every letter of every bill before you cast your vote? And I'll start with Commissioner Kramer.
Well, first of all, I get to vote, I don't know, on a couple of thousand orders probably per year that I vote on, and I've never voted on one I didn't read every word of. Now, having said that, I get to set the agenda a little bit, so I don't have to vote on it an hour after a couple $1,000 bill has been presented. So then at that point, you have to decide you determine what's best for your constituents, to vote with it impossible to be able to read, and vote your conscience and vote what you think is in the bill, or do you not? What I would say I would do is that I would fight very hard for reform so that we'd have the types of reforms that would allow a member to read every bill. One thing about an amendment like that, and I'd love to have an amendment like that, is that it would discipline Congress to not issue up 2,000-page bills. That's the problem. you could read every bill if they weren't 2,000 pages, and there's no need for them to be 2,000 pages. There are any number of people in this room that could write common sense legislation and make it legible, make it short, make it simple, and make it good.
Okay. Mr. Olson.
I wouldn't read a 2,000-page bill. I would throw it in the garbage. There's no reason for law to be that long. The people who live under it should be able to understand it. It should be presented in time for anybody who has to vote on it to reasonably be able to read and understand it and think about the implications of it before they do it. Absolutely, our Congress should not be signing into law anything that they haven't written and read and thought through. Additionally, if it's a law that applies to individual people, it should be limited in complexity and size to the point where a normal person can read and understand it. A business bill or something that applies to a complicated enterprise could be larger, but there should not be legislation that applies, especially there are some I've seen that carry criminal penalties and apply to normal people.
Commissioner Cole.
Thank you, Dave. It's interesting that, my time in the Marine Corps, I was fortunate enough to be a company commander for a while, and you had a lot of people and a lot of paperwork that came in front of you. And I think I'd use the same approach I did there if we're in Congress, that either I or someone on the staff would make sure they personally read all of the items inside the bill before you ever voted on it. It's probably unrealistic to think you could read everything, but someone, either yourself or your staff, needs to have read it and make sure you talk to them before you ever voted on anything.
Representative Copeland.
Well, welcome to North Dakota. That's exactly how we do things in North Dakota. I think some of the words that will live in political infamy in legislative circles are the words of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We have to pass the bill so we can find out what's in it. That never happens in North Dakota. We always read the bills, and it's very important to do that. That's, I think, why she is now the minority leader instead of the Speaker, and I support that demotion. It's very important for us, I think, to look at, and as has been said, of course I'd read every bill or have staff do it if we're allowed to. I mean, if a 2,000-page bill drops on your desk and you're told you're voting on this in 10 minutes, I'm not a speed reader, so I can't commit to doing that. However, I would do everything within my power to stop that kind of thing, those kind of shenanigans from going on in Washington. They don't have to go on, they don't go on in North Dakota. Those of us who are legislators also know that you might get a bill that's several pages, not 2,000, but it maybe have 5 or 10 or 15 pages in North Dakota. There might be 5 paragraphs that actually contain changes. So those are the underscored paragraphs. That's part of the legislative process. That's what you focus on. How is the law being changed?
Commissioner Giddle.
Well, I think realistically, one uses the resources of Congress and the staff to get good, solid summaries of the bills. The key thing is, do you have time to absorb the details so you can make good judgments about these things? If bills are rushed through, like the Health Care Act was, and people don't have time to absorb it, and we're left to our devices to later discover what's in it, and then also leave gaping holes so that the regulatory agencies have enormous powers to fill them in, I think we've got a problem. That's one of the fundamental problems that we have with the Health Care Act, and it's the most extreme example, because there are plenty of other examples of the same thing. So between the time a bill is submitted and the time we bring it to the floor, we might allow ample time for a congressperson and their staff to absorb it and read the solid summaries that accompany it. I think that will solve a lot. Now, reading every line of every bill would be impossible. There literally would. There's just too much that our federal government does to accomplish that. So I don't think we should, create any illusions among the people that are listening tonight that that's even possible.
Representative Grundy.
Thank you. And as was alluded to, as legislators, we have a lot of pieces of legislation that come in front of us, and you learn how to read through those pieces of legislation through the proper markings that are done by your council, and so you can get through those pieces of legislation. But let's return to what the Founding Fathers had said, and the Founding Fathers actually had said that there wouldn't be these 2,000 type-page bills, that you would stick to the issue at hand and the one issue. And if you focus on and we return and we reform the government to the point where we're dealing with the issues one single at a time, there aren't 2,000-page bills at that point. You're dealing with that issue, take up that issue, vote it up and down, and move it forward. And you don't have the problem of having to worry about that every line, every word issue.
this from the audience as well. How does one new congressman from a small populous state make changes in a 400-plus congressional membership body? I'll start with Mr. Olson.
Well, you are still one voice in a large crowd. I think that the advantage, at least the advantage I would have, is that my position is, I think, quite a bit different from most of the rest of Congress. I think it would stand out. And that's what we need, is different voices. It seems like we have a whole bunch of people that are there and they want to argue about things or details of things that don't really add up to anything substantial. They want to talk about cutting programs that add up to a few $1 million, or argue about a detail of something, but they don't want to talk about cutting billions or trillions.
Commissioner Call.
Well, I think the first thing you have to do for a state like this is make sure you elect a good one. Somebody that's not afraid to get out there and lead. So that's the first step, is get somebody good you send out to D.C. But beyond that, I'll give you a good example. Is that there's a retired Marine, Congressman John Klein is his name. He's a Republican out of the Southern Minnesota district. The first thing I would do when I get out there is you find like-type minded individuals and you work with them. I'd find that those out there that are veterans, those that are from energy-producing states, those out there that understand and have a value the same kind of demographics of North Dakota, and you get with them, you start bringing your ideas into their team, if you will, because there are good people in D.C. We just got to find the right ones, and they step forward to leadership positions.
Representative Cowell.
Well, it's an excellent question, and I think the first place to look is a track record. I've asked people to judge me not just on what I say, but what I've done. Anyone can issue a press release, anyone can make political statements, anyone can take positions. I've been doing this for 17 years in the North Dakota legislature. I've done it as chairman of the Council of State Governments. It was alluded to earlier, the importance of building coalitions, working across the aisle, working within the legislative process. That's how things get done. But more importantly than that, one of the reasons I'm in this race is that many people who are new in Congress, who are trying to change Washington and take power out of Washington and bring it back to the states, who I knew when they served in state legislatures, when I was chairing the Council of State Governments, have asked me to run because they believe that I can make a difference from day one and help make that happen.
Commissioner Gill.
There's two things I would say. First is the attitude of the representative itself. I talked earlier about relationships. It's very important to keep a priority is preservation of relationships, so that you're never throwing bombs or making personal accusations, and that you always leave open the possibility of building a coalition to move forward an idea. The second thing is having good staff that is invested with that same attitude, and to insist upon that as you go about leading not only the staff but also a portion of a caucus that you're trying to build.